The history of Spindale United Methodist Church is as old as the town of Spindale itself. Growing out of a union church organized in 1916 with the construction of Spindale's first textile plant.
Spindale Methodist Episcopal Church South, as it was originally called, was organized in 1919 with 23 charter members. The first minister to serve was Reverend W.C. Jones. This was the new Forest City charge and included Cedar Grove, Salem, Spindale, and Alexander.
At the 1920 conference, a new charge was formed. The Spindale-Alexander charge was ministered by Reverend W.M. Heckard. The two churches worked harmoniously together, and in 1922, the first parsonage was built.
In the fall of 22, annual conference assigned Reverend J.J. Gray to the charge, and he was followed by Reverend Oscar L. Simpson. Under Reverend Simpson's leadership, the first Boy Scout troop in Spindale was formed. In 1924, the Women's Missionary Society was organized. This would later be known as the United Methodist Women.
In 1926, the church continued to grow under Reverend T.C. Jordan, and plans were underway for an educational building. Reverend W. Arthur Barber became pastor of the charge in 1928. It was under his leadership that the educational building was erected in 1929. Also during this time, Pleasant Grove replaced Alexander in the charge.
The Conference of 1931 sent Reverend Walter R. Kelly. During the 30s, there were two active women's groups at Spindale Methodist Episcopal, the Missionary Society and the Epworth League. They were collectively known as the Ladies' Auxiliary, and they purchased several pieces of furniture and a new stove for the parsonage.
By 1935, the membership of our church had grown to 260. The church now felt that it was strong enough to stand alone as a charge. That fall, Spindale received its first full-time pastor, Reverend F. J. Stowe. During his service, a fund was started for the building of a new sanctuary.
By the beginning of the 40s, Spindale was no longer Methodist Episcopal South, but simply Spindale Methodist. Reverend J.L. Ingram was sent as pastor by the 1940 conference. In 1941, a new pastor, Reverend R.L. Bass, was named. It was during this time that a financial drive for a new sanctuary really got underway. In the fall of 1940, the Women's Missionary Society was now the Women's Society of Christian Service. The charter for WSCS was signed with 31 charter members. Circles worked very hard to continue to update the parsonage.
Reverend J.S. Gibb was named pastor of the church in the fall of 45. During his pastorate, the congregation and local industry contributed almost $20,000 to the building fund.
Following the annual conference of 1947, Reverend Courtney B. Ross became pastor. Plans for the new sanctuary were adopted, and fundraising continued. In 1948, the women's group became politically active, starting a letter-writing campaign urging senators to adopt the Marshall Plan. In 1950, the chancel choir was formed with Bill Barnes as its first choir director. He continued in that role on and off for almost 20 years.
Reverend Jesse Wilkinson was named pastor of the church in 1951, and it was through his leadership that the decision was made to erect the new sanctuary. The last Sunday morning service was held in the old church on March 16, 1952. A few days later, the old frame Union Church structure, which had been in use since 1919, was torn down. The new sanctuary was officially opened on Sunday, February 1st, 1953.
During 1955, the Methodist Men Organization was formed. A lot on Pleasant Street was purchased for the building of a new parsonage.
Reverend W.T. Medlin took over his duties as pastor of the Spindale Church in the fall of 1956. During his pastorate, the parsonage on Pleasant Street was built for $30,000. By the end of the 50s, the women's group had 6 circles, published their first cookbook, and started a snack supper for the youth.
In 1960, Reverend Cheryl B. Biggers became pastor. The old parsonage was sold in '62, and the proceeds were applied to the new parsonage.
Reverend John S. Jordan became pastor of the church in 1965. He was followed by Reverend Reginald J. Cook in 1969. Reggie, as he was often called, served the church for 4 years.
The 70s saw lots of growth and changes for the women of Spindale, including a name change. In 1973, the ladies' group was renamed the United Methodist Women. New goals were set, including Bible studies, checking on people who live alone, clothing for children, entertaining Broughton Hospital patients, cleaning church pews, and serving meals for bereaved families. Reverend G. Perkins served the church until 1977. During his pastorate, the sanctuary was air-conditioned, the parsonage redecorated, and a church van was purchased. There was also a summer adventure program for children started, along with the formation of a senior citizens group.
Reverend Frank Grice was assigned to Spindale United Methodist Church at the annual conference of 1977. In his years with the church, both the young adult and fellowship Sunday school classes were formed. Special attention was given to children and youth programs, with an active UMYF and children's choir resulting. In February of '79, a building committee was appointed to survey the future facility needs of the church. Efforts of the committee produced the plans to construct an addition on the north side of the sanctuary. This would include a fellowship hall, kitchen, choir room, office, and library. Plans would also include a handicap ramp and modifications to the choir loft. The groundbreaking for the new addition was March 4, 1984.
Reverend Don Lloyd was appointed to Spindale United Methodist Church at the conference of 1984. Under his leadership, the building was opened in 1985. Reverend Lloyd served for 4 years and started several new programs. The 1-2-3 Club encouraged 1, read the Bible, 2, to pray daily, and 3, attend church. His interest in children and youth led to play school for the church and public, plus Mother's Morning Out and the addition of playground equipment in the recreational area. Also during his ministry, the hanging of the green service during Advent season was started. It was also during this time that worship was taped for the benefit of shut-ins. Ash Wednesday was observed, and a dramatized version of the Last Supper drew interest year after year. The 80s were also a big year for UMW, with the first bazaar and soup sale held in 1980. Their work also continued with Broughton Hospital and several special services for the church.
Reverend Keys Pendleton came to the church as pastor in 1988. New hymnals were purchased during his pastorate. Heritage Sunday was also observed, and Reverend Pendleton's entrance on a horse was memorable.
The annual conference in 1990 assigned Reverend Joe Falk as pastor. During his tenure, the church completed the new educational building on May 16, 1993. During the construction phase, children helped bury a time capsule that will be opened in 2043. It contains letters from church members, recent bulletins, tapes from all living preachers, and a church history. A house and additional lot were also purchased to allow the church to grow even more. The church also began the Lunch Buddy program with Spindale Elementary School. A handbell choir was started to enhance the music in worship.
In 1997, Reverend Mike Duncan began his ministry at SUMC. The church continued to grow with youth trips, strong men's and women's groups, and church recreation.
Dan Ramsey was appointed to Spindale in 2000. During his tenure, Young at Heart was very active with overnight trips, train rides, plays, and of course, eating out.
Reverend Gerald Davis came to Spindale in 2002. Under his leadership, the church added another worship service. The early service was a casual service with guitars that met at 8:45 on Sunday mornings. Praise in Motion, a liturgical dance group, began in 2004. The church also became involved in a community soup kitchen.
In 2008, Reverend James Pyatt began his ministry. Gospel Music Sundays became a hit, packing the pews for these special music Sundays.
The annual conference of 2012 assigned Reverend Bruce Jones. Under his leadership, the early service took on a very contemporary feel. Trunk or Treat started with over 200 children visiting our church parking lot on Halloween.
In 2014, Reverend J. Ross O'Neill began his ministry. Pastor Ross started a monthly gospel sing-along and a weekly service at one of the retirement communities in the area. A monthly community meal was started that includes bingo and great fellowship with the community.
The first female minister to serve Spindale United Methodist Church began in 2018. Reverend Angela Burris has already made her mark on the church grounds by planting daylilies on some of the hillsides. Spindale's first ever bike rally was held in conjunction with the town to celebrate the Thermal Belt Rail Trail.
The church continues many of the ministries that were started. Fall Fixins and a huge yard sale organized by UMW provides money for local missions.
Music has always been a vital part of worship at SUMC. It continues to be a blessing every Sunday with an active choir and special music Sundays. The church continues to serve the community through the preschool, fellowship meals, and working with local schools. Spindale United Methodist Church has enjoyed 100 years of great traditions, fellowship, and love for Jesus Christ. God has blessed us throughout the years with dedicated and outstanding pastors. We are proud of our faithful church members who share their gifts in ministry with the congregation and the community. We look forward to many more years of making disciples for Jesus Christ.